If there's one thing that we can learn throughout history, it's that nothing really ever seems to go the way the people expect it to. During Reconstruction, the radical Republicans planned for equality for all of the freed slaves in the South, but instead they were met with the Jim Crow laws and the KKK. Throughout the Progressive era, people bought canned meat and processed foods, hoping to save some time while making healthy meals for their family in the new urban environment. But then The Jungle was published. During World War I, both the Allied powers and the Central powers thought that this was going to be a quick and easy war. Maybe a few months tops. Then, they were introduced to all of this brand new technology that drove the soldiers into the trenches, and we wind up with a several-year stalemate on the Western Front. During the 1920s, the economy was booming, jobs were plentiful, industry was going great, and the stock market was growing and growing and growing and growing. And people thought that it just would never stop. The stock market would just continue to be a big success. Then we reached that fateful October of 1929, when the stock market just went and we were thrown into an era that we now know as the Great Depression.
How can you let things get so bad?
It wasn't one simple event, like the stock market crash, that threw this nation into a downward spiral. It wasn't as though a hand reached down from the sky and pushed people out of their homes while at the same time taking their jobs away. While the economy was doing well in the 1920s, there were major warning signs that maybe things weren't going to last forever. Yes, they had fancy new things like automobiles, radios, vacuum cleaners, and in some homes, washing machines. But how did they get the money for all of this new technology? How did all of this spending and consumption play a role in the start of the Great Depression? We are going to explore three major causes of the Great Depression and how the Roaring Twenties threw us into the downward spiral of the depressing 30s. The first cause of the Great Depression is something called overproduction. We had mentioned before that farmers missed out on the Roaring Twenties because as soon as World War I was over, the overwhelming demand for their crops dropped drastically. Here were farmers who had spent the better part of the Great War trying to not only feed the United States, but Great Britain and France as well. They were buying an incredible amount of technology, such as tractors, to compensate for this high demand for their food. For years, farmers were producing more and more and more, until suddenly people stopped buying. The government didn't need to send food overseas anymore, and what the farmers were producing was far more than what the people in the United States needed. The prices of their crops fell until farmers found themselves in massive debt over the technology that they had to purchase to meet the once high demand for their food. During the 1920s, rather than learning a lesson from the farmers, factories and major businesses started to overproduce their own goods as well. Mass production, which we've talked about during class, was made very easy by the use of the assembly line. To use a simple example, we can take a look at the automobile industry. From 1921 to 1929, the sales of the Ford Motor Company more than quadrupled as Ford was selling its Model T and started to mass produce its Model A in 1927. Thank you, Lily. With this increased sale in cars came an increased demand in textiles for car seats, oil, rubber, and steel. This led to more jobs and higher wages, which in turn led to more people who wanted to buy cars. Expecting sales to continue going up with their Model A, Ford continued to mass produce their cars. The only problem was, people already had a car. Nothing had changed. There was nothing new and fancy on this Model A that wasn't already on the car in their driveways. So, people stopped buying. And when people stopped buying, Ford Motor Company stopped making money. This led to less demand for textiles, oil, steel, and rubber, which then led to lower wages in those industries and in some cases, people losing their jobs. As people lost their jobs, they stopped buying cars. Ford Motor Company then had a massive amount of cars with nobody to buy them. The second cause for the Great Depression is something called credit. Buying on credit is how everybody was able to pay for their brand new automobile, or washing machine, or vacuum cleaner, or refrigerator, or whatever other overproduced shiny object happened to show up on the store shelves. Using credit is the idea of buy now, pay later. A consumer, or buyer, borrows money from another source, usually a bank, to make a big purchase that they might otherwise not be able to afford. Personal finance lesson, kids. If you can't afford it, don't buy it. The borrower agrees to pay the money back in time with interest. Interest means that they're charged for the money that they borrowed. For example, if I use my credit card to buy a sweet $2,000 computer and I don't pay the bank back right away, my new $2,000 computer could wind up costing me $2,500 instead. Credit caused a lot of people to go into debt, and as employers started to cut hours or wages, they couldn't pay back the banks all of the money that they had borrowed. The banks responded to this debt by taking back all of those shiny new objects that everybody had bought during the 1920s. Some families were left with nothing. Speaking of buying on credit, the third cause of the Great Depression brings us back to the stock market crash of October 1929 and that whole consumer policy of buy now, pay later. Over-speculation. This is a fun economic term that I am going to try to put into 7th grade words for you. People wanted to make money quickly. I mean, really, who doesn't? A quick way to make money was to invest in the stock market. By buying shares in a successful business, you could potentially double your money in just a few days' time. For example, if Prairie Annie's Buffalo Chips started selling stock at $25 per share, you could invest $100 in the business and buy 4 shares. Since opening up her Buffalo Chip company, Prairie Annie sure has become quite the fashionista. What was up with that sparkly cowgirl hat? Anyway, the Buffalo Chip company starts to do really well. People are buying up the stock like crazy. Suddenly, each share of the company is worth a lot more money. Let's say something like $50 more. You bought 4 shares worth $25, investing $100. Now, each share is worth $75. That means you own $300 worth of stock in Prairie Annie's Buffalo Chips. Check that out. You just tripled your money overnight. People liked the idea of that fast money making, like we said before. Who doesn't? So, they just started buying everything. They got overly excited and started expecting more from the stock market than it could deliver. People started to buy stock on margin, which is like using credit for the stock market. They would borrow money from stockbrokers, people who buy and sell shares of corporations, to make an investment. If the stock failed and was worth less than what the investor paid, not only would the investor lose his own money, but he would also owe money to the broker. When the stock market crashed, so many people were affected because they had bought their stock on margin. So there, we have the 3 causes of the Great Depression. In a moment, we are going to take a look at 3 types of programs that could help solve, or at least soften, the problems of the Great Depression. But first, music break! The 3 types of programs that could help us out in the Great Depression, they can be remembered as the 3 R's: relief, recovery, and reform. Relief programs are programs that give direct aid or help to the needy. For example, a program that raises money for or hands out food to those in need. Recovery programs are temporary programs created to bring things back to how they once were. The goal for recovery programs is to restart consumer demand and get people spending money again. Reform programs are permanent programs created to make changes to something that had failed our economy. They are designed to look at the causes of the Great Depression and make changes to offer solutions. Now that you know 3 major causes of the Great Depression and 3 ways that we could potentially solve these problems, be prepared to join a think tank. You are going to be creating solutions for these causes of the Great Depression.